and I hope I know how to make it work. So my thought there is that I will not be posting this recording except to make it available privately to any of you who would like to be able to review it later, but it won't be out on, for anyone to find. And I think that's all I needed to say. If you have more, okay, so a couple other things, yeah. Please mute yourselves. I can hear a lot of background noise from various people. In a minute, I'm going to go ahead and mute you all, but it's better for you to figure out how to mute yourself, because then you'll know how to unmute yourself when you want to speak, and please do unmute yourself and speak when you want to. You can also send comments and questions through the chat box, and I'll be trying to keep an eye on that to help Maria, help her field those questions. So I think that was it. So I'll turn it over to Maria Harwood from the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. Thanks, Maria.
Great, thanks, Margaret. How's the audio?
It's good for me.
All right. Thanks for keeping an eye on everybody with muting them so we can all hear loud and clear. I didn't know if you mentioned the chat box function. We're gonna try out that in a second just so everybody can find where that is. I also didn't know if you wanted to talk about if we have any contingency plan in the event of the whole Zoom bombing thing, just pending the webinar, or there's a new phenomenon happening.
Yeah, so I was in a meeting the other day which was broken into by 4 or 5 very boisterous 20-year-old boys who did things like blah, 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 blah. And fortunately did not post pornography, which is the other fun thing that people do on Zoom meetings. So I think we have set it up in a way that that's unlikely to happen. But should it happen, and I can't figure out how to make it stop happening, which I should be able to do by just, kicking them out of the meeting. But if I can't, what I'll do is just end the meeting and send you all a new password and we get back on immediately.
Okay, great. Thanks for explaining that. As you said, I'm Maria Harwood. I'm an urban conservation specialist with the Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. So the first thing I wanted to open up to everybody, thank you so much for everybody registering and getting on today. The lower toolbar, or it might be at the top of your screen, there's a chat function. So I wanted everybody just to find where that is. If you're on the phone, of course, if you have questions at the end, you're gonna have to unmute yourself on the phone and then speak up. But if you joined us by the Zoom meeting, I wanted everybody to go ahead and try and find that function. And then there was a little bit of pre-reading or pre-homework that Margaret had sent around. The Soak It Up webinar that I'm gonna be breezing through today was also previously recorded. It was a collaboration between folks in City of Alexandria, Arlington, Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District. So if everyone can find that group chat and just put a yes or a no, how many folks actually went ahead and were able to get that webinar to load and took a look at some of those slides or that recording before? It also just helps give me a feeling for the background of the group, kind of where everybody is with their knowledge and how in depth to go. Looks like maybe we've got a good split, maybe, about 50-50. Some yes and some no's. So that resource is out there for everyone. Again, those webinars are up there.
I can't find the chat.
Okay. So there is, for me, it's at the bottom of the screen. I don't know if it's a toolbar at the bottom or the top. Sometimes it seems to hover around. There should be
You might have to move your mouse around for it to appear at the bottom.
There should be a little kind of thought bubble with ... and the word chat underneath.
Can't find it.
Okay. Did you want to chime in and just say yes or no if you were able to get those webinars to load before?
Yes, I could not get them to download. However,
Okay.
I did try to get as much on their websites as I could to read. And also, could you speak a little louder, put the mic a little closer? I can't hear you well. Thank you.
Sure.
Don't forget, everybody, you can turn up your volume also.
Let's see how close I can get this. And I'll speak up as well. Is that a little bit louder?
Yes.
Okay.
It is. I do appreciate you speaking up all you can. Thank you.
Great. So I think breezing through the chat box, some folks in the past have had issues with the webinars loading, and I don't know if that's the browser you're using, if you're using Internet Explorer or Chrome or something, but we did also upload the webinar. We uploaded a PDF version of the slides. So you wouldn't be able to hear the recorded audio, but you could at least parse through the slides. But we're going to go through them right now, breeze through some of them. There's other resources as well that we've recently recorded. At the end, Margaret's going to send an email to everybody with some resources. There'll be a lot of questions, I'm sure, and I'll refer to a bunch of different websites and resources that are out there. So we'll kind of compile all of those and send them together in an email as a follow-up. As she said, we are going to record this session to have to try and help answer those questions that you might have and just keep track of the Q&A. What else did I have? So some of you might be logging in from counties that are outside Fairfax County. I actually just wanted to use the chat box one more time if everybody can still find that. Looks like my mouse. Oh, okay, there we go. Froze. Would everybody mind just chiming in if they're inside, what county they're in, if City of Alexandria, Fairfax County, so we can get a feeling. So mostly I'll be referring to today, okay, looks like we've got some folks from outside the area as well. The Northern Virginia Soil and Water Conservation District, who I work for, we give drainage and erosion technical advice to homeowners within the boundaries of Fairfax County. We also have some cost share programs, and we have extended those programs to City of Fairfax and City of Alexandria through some partnerships. So for the most part, our services are within Fairfax County, and I will refer to ordinances or different maps and things within Fairfax County. And some of you for other counties, or I see Prince William and Loudoun County, there are soil and water districts in those other areas as well. Each soil and water district kind of across, some of them are more than just one county. Most of them in the state of Virginia are more than just one county, and they serve sort of different functions. So they might not work exactly the same as our district, but they are resources as well, and I encourage you to seek out soil and water districts, and if you have questions, to follow up with them and see if they can provide you with any sort of resources. All right, so let's go ahead and, whoops, what did I do? Share. Okay. So I've got my screen up now for the PowerPoint slides that I'm going to be going through. If you see a bunch of long faces on the right-hand side of these little thumbnails of people who have shared their video screen, you can minimize those so once I maximize these slides, you won't have any interference. So in that bar, it might have popped up on your right-hand screen. There's sort of the one furthest to the left, it just looks like a little underscore. If you click that, you can minimize all those, the videos. So you'll be able to see the screen fully. So again, just a reminder, we are going to record this webinar. These slides, as I said, were a partnership, City of Falls Church, Arlington County, City of Alexandria, our district, and Northern Virginia Regional Commission. There are, again, I talked about sending resources at the end of the video series with a follow-up email. In addition to the Soak It Up webinar, there's recently been a recording of the rain garden presentation. So there's lots of resources on NVRC's website regarding to rain gardens. We've gone ahead, typically we hold in-person presentations of the rain garden throughout the year, but we've gone ahead and we've recorded that webinar. So just like Soak It Up, you can watch that at your own pace, at your own leisure, and go through those slides if we don't have an in-person presentation again for a while. So the Soak It Up, trying to get my slide to change. Here we go. So a little bit of background talking about stormwater management. There are some solutions that we'll talk through. Across your county, across your HOA or your home, there are many different types of stormwater solutions. So some contractors might talk about using more infrastructure that's maybe more conventional. So that might just be piping the water and getting it away from the home, from the foundation, and just rerouting that water. A bunch of these stormwater practices that we're going to be talking about here, where they're appropriate, we have wide-ranging different types of soils and other site constraints. So it might be hard to include some of these things in your landscape. But we're going to talk about where we can use some of these green stormwater practices. So they're focusing on infiltrating that stormwater, so the water coming off of your hard surfaces like your roof, coming through your gutters and those downspouts. Can we take that water and put it back into the ground, have it soak in, and then be recharging our groundwater system. Again, some areas more soils are suitable for other things. We'll also talk about conservation landscaping, which is using native plants, which if you're familiar with the Plant Nova Natives campaign and their amazing website, they have many different resources out there to help you get started with native plants. So what is a watershed? Just to start off, background information. So we all live within a watershed, depending. So a watershed is an area of land that drains to a common body of water. So I like to think of describing the bathtub analogy. If you turn the water on in the shower, it's going all over the place in the tub, but eventually it's all draining and exiting through the drain. So no matter where that water is following, it's all taking all the soap and all the other stuff that falls into that tub into one spot and draining. So that's how you can think about a watershed. It's important to understand watersheds because they connect us all. So everything we do on the land affects our water and our water quality, because all of that land does drain. Everything that we do on that land drains through to one common area. So it kind of drains and concentrates all of that stuff. So if we use fertilizer, herbicides, or pesticides on the landscape, if there's oils and other heavy metals from cars, all of those things do eventually find their way if we don't pick up our pet waste properly. We have some slides. So again, the definition: an area of land that drains to a stream, marsh, or other body of water. So everyone's got a watershed address. Here's an example, a map again. For the most part, this is the Fairfax County area, Arlington, City of Alexandria, Fairfax City included. So it shows the breakdowns of where those watersheds are. So these are some boundaries of the more major watersheds: Powhatan Creek, Acton Creek, Difficult Run. Each of those watersheds can be broken down into smaller and smaller parts for those little feeder streams. So, but these are kind of the main categories that we talk about when we break down. So for an example here, for one spot where we are, Acton Creek, which eventually does drain to the Potomac River. So you can say you're in the Acton Creek watershed. You can also say you're within the Potomac River watershed. Then eventually we get to Chesapeake Bay and then the ocean. So these watersheds are sort of nested inside each other. So you can say you're as small as a local stream, or even up to within the Atlantic Ocean watershed. This is a great schematic from City of Alexandria. I just referenced a few of these things, but different sources of pollutants in our that could end up in our waterways. So things we do on the land, if we don't pick up after our pet waste, if we don't pick up, trash or litter, if we over fertilize, if the car is leaking or other things like that, all of those things, what happens on the land ends up draining through our stormwater system. So you can see that great, actually this is one thing I didn't check. Margaret, if I move my mouse around, can people see the area that I'm pointing to on the screen?
Yep.
Okay. All right, so this grate is a part of our stormwater system. So our stormwater systems, for the most part, everything that goes into these grates where we might see swales along the roadside, all of these go straight into our streams. They do not go to the same place. For the most part, internally, most of us are on, some people might be on septic systems where your home waste goes. Can you still hear me? For some reason, the audio sounds a little bit different.
Yes, I can.
Okay, not sure what's happening. So from the homes, when you use the sink, flush the toilet, all of that goes into our sanitary sewer system. So that's a separate system of pipes, and all of that goes to treatment plants to get really well treated. Our stormwater system is a separate system of pipes than that sanitary system. And those are discharging into our streams and our waterways. That's why we need to be so careful to clean up what's happening on the land around us, because there's that direct connection into our waterways. So what might happen if we don't keep our, reduce the amount of pollutants on the land if we're not cleaning up? You can get different types of environmental impacts, both on your water quality and the quantity of water. So the quality of water, we're talking about it's being impacted by those pollutants. You might get fish kills or algal blooms, all those things from excessive fertilizer use or other issues with algae. Water quantity as well. If we have too much water moving into our stormwater system and moving into our streams, that can also have an environmental impact. So if you see this lower right-hand corner, the stream is pretty eroded. So its banks are undercut, and because we have an issue with the water quantity. So the more and more we put up homes, we pave have our streets, our sidewalks, more hard surfaces all lead to a greater quantity of stormwater runoff. So in our suburban areas and our urban areas, we have a really high amount of those hard surfaces or impervious surfaces that all generate stormwater runoff, because when the precipitation happens, water cannot soak into those areas. so we can see these impacts on our streams. Can also have damage to public and or private properties, everything from basement flooding to erosion. Many of you did send pictures. Thank you. Hopefully we'll get to those at the end. Like we said, Margaret, we've got a little bit more time than the hour. So if people want to stay on, if they have the time, we'll talk through those individual pictures and issues. But things like ponding water in the yard, but all the way up until actually damage to the home and the foundation and basement flooding. So as I talked about at the start, there are some conventional solutions. These are more the capture it in a pipe and move it away quickly. Not saying that these are wrong. These are the typically used solutions, but now we're trying to think a little bit more about adding in the infiltration. So instead of just taking the water off our property, pushing it to somebody else to have to deal with, let's try and be responsible stewards and capture our stormwater as best we can and reuse it or let it soak into our properties. So common solutions that you might see around homes or your communities that are these conventional solutions are just downspout extensions. So burying, connecting it to a corrugated pipe, burying it, moving that water away from the foundation, which is always a great idea. You don't really want to have that water discharging within about 10 feet, especially 10 feet if you have like an underground foundation. It can be closer if you don't have any subgrade structures, basements or things. But generally, rule of thumb, we say is about 10 feet from the basement is a safe place to discharge stormwater. French drains are another commonly used solution. I've heard French drains kind of used as a term, sort of a catch-all when stormwater contractors are talking about them. So sometimes these solutions, the downspout extension, which is just taking a solid pipe and moving it away for the most part, sometimes those are talked about as French drains. It can be hard, you know, you can ask clarifying questions to really try and understand what your contractors are talking about when they say a French drain. There's many different sort of solutions that go into it. So trying to understand the solution. So here what we're referencing to a French drain, they're commonly used to try and capture water from low-lying areas. These are catch basins or boxes with grates on them that are connected to pipes. So these pipes in a French drain system are perforated. So we have this rock to try and prevent the movement of that soil to clog up these perforated pipes. But the French drains move the water. They're trying to drain the surrounding soils, soak it into the pipe and move it away again for any low-lying wet spots. These solutions are typically used. Catch basins I just referred to, they can be a part of that French drain system, or they can be, again, those low-lying wet spots, they can be installed. And then frequently the catch basins are, instead of, in the previous slide, there was a perforated pipe with holes in it that was trying to also drain the surrounding area. Catch basins can just be used and attached to a solid pipe that's then diverting that water away someplace else. Another conventional solution really commonly used is a dry creek bed. Again, we've got a downspout up here. Sometimes these solutions, you know, are great ways to try and move water off of hill slopes. So a lot of what we're going to do is trying to see if there's ways that we can divert runoff off of hill slopes, because they can be very erosive on hill slopes. So this was probably cutting into the soil. So by hardening this channel, can safely divert it to another place. Maybe there's an opportunity at the bottom of this hill to then infiltrate that water, which is the next step we would like to see. But as a conventional solution, dry creek beds are sort of just a more visual way. Instead, you could have just buried a pipe through here and connected to this downspout. but they can also be larger, capturing water, moving across a landscape. Some examples of conventional solutions. This is installation of some retaining wall and also French drain system going in. I'm going to try to, keeping an eye on time, breeze through these. Again, there is the recorded webinar and the PDF of the slides available, so we can hopefully get to some questions that Margaret is monitoring in the chat box. So conventional solutions, what do? We just talked about them. They capture and they concentrate that flow. Sometimes they cannot be effective in dealing with a whole bunch of water. You might have a lot of maintenance. I will say for all of our stormwater solutions, you will have ongoing maintenance that you need to keep an eye on, but some of these conventional solutions like French drains might be more maintenance intensive. French drain systems generally, when I've heard people have installed them, sometimes I hear they fail in as little as 2 years. Some people say they fail and they might last as long as 10 years. That's because they have those perforated pipes, and there was that gravel around it to try and prevent the soil from silting in. But because of all the small slits in the holes, they do tend to clog over time. So digging out and replacing that system, because it does have a lifespan associated with it. Outfall limitations. So you're putting this water into a pipe. Well, where are you sending it? Where are you directing it? Where is that water eventually going to go to? You need to think about that. Quality and quantity benefits. We'll talk about these when we discuss the different types of green or low impact design solutions. Some slides that just show some of those issues that I saw. Frequently, those catch basin boxes can get clogged with sediments if the surrounding area is not stabilized, if there isn't good turf cover, if they're used in shady areas or areas where there's lots of mulch. All of that can still wash into those boxes, clog up the boxes themselves, not only the boxes, but even the drains. So the conventional ones that we just discussed versus these best management practices, I kind of call them low impact design or the more green type of solutions. So our stormwater best management practices we'll talk about. You might have heard of rain gardens as a term. That's one type of solution. So they really offer an opportunity to, what we're trying to do is capture that stormwater. So reduce the overall volume of that stormwater that's going to somebody else. With that conventional, we put it into a pipe. Like we said, that pipe is going somewhere. It's impacting somebody else in some way. So best management practices, we try to take our stormwater, use it on site, give it a chance to infiltrate into the ground. So as I just talked about those best management practices, one type homeowners hear a lot about are rain gardens. There's other things such as rain barrels, cisterns, permeable pavers, conservation landscaping, which is using native plants, vegetated swales, and then infiltration trenches or dry wells. Those are two words that sort of mean the same thing. Generally, homeowners, we talk about dry wells as a smaller scale for a single home on a lot. Infiltration trench is sort of a scaled up version of that practice. So it's just a larger size facility meant to take more stormwater, more downspouts, more runoff. It's just larger than those dry well systems. So we're gonna breeze through a couple of these to try and describe some of them. Some of them I've left off. Again, you can check out the other webinars, but just in the interest of time to move through these. So we'll describe them, talk about when you might be able to use them in a landscape and how are they going to serve you. So infiltration trenches, we just talked about, again, the dry wells are sort of that smaller size system. These two things work the same way. So we're just gonna go through and give an example of what a larger size system, the infiltration trench is. So really basically, the infiltration trenches are just holes in the ground, which we either fill with rock material, dry wells. There are some like do-it-yourself kind of kits that you might see at your local hardware store that sort of look like a trash can system. So it's just, it's empty in the middle. So that gives more void space. So you can take more stormwater if you just have a hole that's empty as opposed to kind of the gravel system. So there's many different systems, but these are basically just big holes in the ground that we dig to a certain depth where we can get better draining soils. For the most part, our soil scientists in our area, I know people are frequently, you go out in your yard to try and plant a plant. We've got that Virginia clay everybody talks about. But these systems, we think about them as trying to get a little bit deeper than just kind of a shallow on the surface. So about 2 to 3 feet down. If you dig down a little bit further, in some areas of the county, you're going to get more freely drained soils. So think about the functioning of a septic system. It's kind of the same thing. Those systems go in, again, about 3 to 4 feet down, but there's more freely draining soils down there that can take the effluent from the home and soak in to the groundwater. So infiltration trenches are sort of doing that same thing. Holes in the ground with the gravel just to hold structure. And a lot of times there are downspouts tied underground straight into these systems. So these can be designed, you might not even see these systems, you might not even know they're there. Some of them can be turfed over. This is an observation well. It is good to have keep some ways where you can keep an eye on them so you can monitor over time how well they're draining down after a storm. You can check the water level in there. So infiltration trenches, like I said, dry wells, sort of a smaller term for the same thing. They can take small amounts of hard surfaces, runoff from hard surfaces, like your rooftop, your driveways, and your lawns. Some of these can also be sized up to really take a large amount, a large volume. Of course, the costs increase as you get larger with these things. But here's an example of just how large they really can be. Really very large, you know, taking area from very large commercial settings, maybe parking lot runoff and other things like that. This is an example of an installation that went in of an infiltration trench. Again, so sort of the end product here, you can see digging down to create that. Some downspouts were routed in here. That's that observation well I talked about, to keep an eye on how things are going and draining down. But this was just turfed over. So the solution, like I said, you might not even know that it's there in the landscape, doing a lot of good for you. So some of these stormwater solutions can really be blended in to the landscape really well. Some of them can be more visual features, like the rain gardens. So again, this infiltration trench example, it used some catch basins to try and drain some low areas. It also had the roof downspouts routed into it. What are the benefits from installing an infiltration trench? So again, both small or large drainage areas. So that's how much runoff can it handle. We said some of them can handle you know, large parking lot areas, so they can really handle a lot of water. So we get quality benefits and runoff reduction benefits from these solutions. Limitations. As with any of these groundwater practices, you really need to have suitable soils for infiltration. So we said most of us are familiar going out and digging a plant, really having heavy clays kind of in the top layer, but these systems, we're really digging down. This one went down 5 feet. So pretty deep systems where we're going to get freer draining soils. So I talked about at the local hardware stores, you might have these dry well kind of pre-made solutions. These again are those chambers that I were talking about. So they're completely empty, so you can actually hold more stormwater than if you just had a whole gravel filled area. Next, we're going to discuss vegetated swales. Some of the one of the homeowner associations that I received pictures from actually was referring to issues with swales, and we'll get to those photos later. But generally, swales are these channels built to convey runoff. They can also you want them to be well stabilized. So you do want to have vegetation there, or even if it's too steep, you might have to use rock material because the vegetation might not be able just to handle the steep slope and slow that water down adequately. So swales generally are conveyance. They're moving that water along from one place to another. There are ways where we can try and slow down the water a little bit. You see kind of like these speed bumps that are built in here to try and allow some ponding and some capture of the water rather than just sending it like a straight chute. This is a bigger example of those previous slides. Dry swales, again, we talked about those little check dams or these kind of rock structures that can be used in them to try and slow that water down, give it a chance to filter in. So these dry swales, even though they just look like they're turfed, they've actually have this amended soil underneath. Take my mouse, okay. So again, we need well draining, good draining soils underneath for these to work, but we can add in some more well draining soil and have these little check dams here to try and allow that water to soak into the ground rather than just speeding on down and through. So here's some pictures of really gorgeous vegetated swales. Overall, we're trying to decrease the amount of the runoff. So doing some volume reduction, some capture and infiltration. Benefits of them, you know, improving drainage, aesthetic value. This is kind of a green street solution here that's highly visible and landscaped. This one is probably, might even be intercepting there's some curb cuts here that might be taking some of that runoff from the street. Limitations to these practices. They're really, you can't just plug them in anywhere. The infiltration trenches, as long as you've got a relatively flat area and well-draining soils, you might be able to stick a dry well or an infiltration trench. The swales really need to be, they're pretty large solutions with gradual slopes for them to really have that capability to slow down and spread their water out. Not very steep solutions. So again, not recommended on a steep slope. What happens when you do have a really steep slope and you do need to use this rock material? Before we showed that dry creek bed solution as a conventional solution. This a step pool is very different solution. So again, we talked about how there's some amended soils under that dry swale. Well, the same thing here with the step pool. So we're really getting in and replacing some of this material. We're trying to have these little these steps, these check dams with these ponding areas. So as that water is flowing through, it's just not shooting quickly down, that it actually has a chance to stop and soak into the ground as it's moving through. So step pools, if you have a steep slope, you really might need to have that rock reinforced channel if it's a shorter and a steeper area, because the vegetation just won't hold up to the velocity or flow moving through there. Much of these are the same as we talked about with the dry swale. So step pools can really be used to recover from pretty drastic situations. So gullies or head cuts that might be occurring in the landscape. These systems might be able to be installed. Limitations, these can be pretty expensive design solutions, lots of earth moving and rock material and grading involved with these. Downslope connection, so that's just to think about, you know, water is still moving through this. We're trying to capture some, but eventually it is going to discharge and it's going to end somewhere. So just thinking about where am I sending this water? Whereas if I get a large storm, you know, I'm going to have a lot more moving through there than my system can handle. So where am I sending that? Making sure it's properly stabilized to handle the amount of flow moving through it. Conservation landscaping. One thing that we talked about, just using local native plants. So replacing turf grass or other invasive areas in the landscape, maybe even just areas of bare soil, and trying to incorporate native plants. Conservation landscaping, so they, again, using the native plants, we're trying to just improve the infiltration of the ground, getting deeper rooted vegetation than the turf. So hopefully if there's some stormwater moving through there, just what falls on it, more of it is going to soak into the ground rather than running off the turf. A lot of water on a turf, especially with the slope, is going to be conveyed across that landscape. It's not going to really have a chance to soak in. So we're hoping with the use of these native plants to give an opportunity for those, for the water to soak in. You know, homeowners, it's a pretty easy do-it-yourself project for those conservation landscaping, removing invasives or turf grass and just adding in some native plants. You know, heavy shade areas, grasses or conventional lawn grasses do not do well in shady areas. If we have, you know, only about 3 to 4 hours of sunshine in that spot, our grasses really aren't going to hold up and do well. So Plant Nova Natives has lots of templates and different designs and plant lists, so you can really use some of those solutions, design it yourself, or have a landscape designer help install those. We do recommend installing those landscapes, amending the soil, trying to break up some of the compaction and including a compost material amendment, again, just to increase the water holding capacity of the soils at that upper level. Let those plant roots have an opportunity to establish and really spread through that area. Why do we like native plants? I talked about this a little bit. Our turf grasses are relatively shallow rooted. Our native plants and other vegetation really have these extensive underground root systems, which helps soak up that water and colonize the area, break up the compaction, all those things. So this is an example of a hill slope that was sort of informally terraced using these I think these were just fallen logs in the area, and extensive amounts of mulch, removing the turf, and put in some native grasses and other shrubs that are growing in here. Another example of this hill slope, and this looks like a whole bunch of golden groundsel that was planted in here. This area looks a little bit more like a foundation planting. Maybe there's some issues with invasive English ivy growing up here. And so it looks like native ferns and other things were included in this landscape bed. Again, a couple more examples of the beauty of the use of native plants. And another example. Again, heavy shade. We talked about turf grass is not growing really well in heavy shade. Looks like lots of wild ginger was used here in the foreground, and I'm sure different types of ferns as well. A hill slope that has English ivy here. So that was removed, and looks like maybe some Carex pennsylvanica, some Pennsylvania sedge that was added in, maybe some shrubs as well on the side. And I'm not sure if that's Heuchera or Tiarella in the front or what that is. These slides were pulled together, examples of conservation landscaping projects from Arlington County's Stormwater Wise program. Extensive area of front turf and replaced with this beautiful pollinator garden. Rain gardens, I'm going to actually, give me 1 second. Let me pause my screen share and let me look, checking how I'm doing on time here. Give me 1 moment. Okay. Oops, let me try and get back in here. All right, I'm gonna try to move right along through some of these. The rain garden solution, again, using native plants. These are shallow landscaped depressions or bowl-shaped areas that we carve into the landscape to try and capture stormwater runoff, slow it down, and soak it in. So again, underlying, we do want to have well-draining soils and put some native plants in there. Sometimes we might need to remove and replace the soil that is there with freer draining soils than what we naturally have. Here's a good example from the side of what to see the underlying underground, what's going on underground. Again, the amended soil, or it might need to be replacement soil in those bowl-shaped depressions. Inflows and outflows, those are areas to think about that might need to be more highly stabilized with rock material, as you can see, because that's where the concentrated flow is going to be coming into those systems, typically coming through pipes from downspouts, and we want to give a chance for that water to slow down and settle a little bit before it enters these areas, so we're not going to have scour. The ponding area, so that's that depression, that bowl-shaped area we talked about. It could be as little as 6 inches, it could be a foot deep, but this sloped area. We really want these areas to drain well within 24 to 48 hours. So we're not having standing water issues. If it's not draining within that time, there could be something wrong with your rain garden. So here's an example of when the soil was just amended. Instead of remove and replacing the native soil, it's just adding in lots of free draining compost. I'm not going to discuss the under drain system. Those are for more kind of intensive, large scale solutions. Typically, for kind of a homeowner scale, the under drains aren't needed depending on the amount of volume you really send into these systems. If you're sending a lot more runoff and more volume, including an under drain is a good step. So here's something, a common misconception we really have, especially when we do our rain garden presentations. People see these low-lying wet areas in their landscape and they think it's already, you know, water's ponding there. It's already almost its own rain garden. Let me go ahead and put a rain garden there. Well, what we're seeing with this low-lying wet spot is the soils really might not be free draining. Again, the rain gardens, we want this water to soak through. We don't want it to sit and pond. So if you've got this low-lying wet area, depending on, you might really need to do extensive amounts of soil mitigation, but it really just might not be a suitable spot for a rain garden. So that's a common misconception we see. These lower lying wet areas, people think it's already kind of a rain garden. What you can do in these areas is put in appropriate native plants that can tolerate wet feet. So you can sort of landscape them in to kind of disguise it a little bit. But a rain garden really isn't a great solution. We have had homeowners do it yourself for the rain gardens, or they've been had contractors install them. They can be really beautiful. Again, we're using native plants, supporting native wildlife, all of those benefits. Permeable paver systems. These are different. They can either be permeable interlocking concrete pavers, or a cement solution or an asphalt solution that are free draining. So basically, these are working by letting the water through the joints in between the pavers. Typically, we have permeable pavers installed in our area, so those are the ones that we've got pictures of. And then a bunch of rock material, so they are excavated down. Similar to the infiltration trench, you've got this area where that water is going to collect in this underground sump, and then hopefully drain into the soils if we've done our soil test to make sure we do have well-draining soils underneath. And under drain might also be a part of that solution. This is an example from Montgomery County's program, I believe, over in Maryland. So that excavation, the installation of that subgrade, that gravel layer, and then putting the pavers on top. Examples of construction. We don't need to discuss edge restraint. So you can take downspouts onto these areas and have it discharge, so they can take more water than just what falls on them during precipitation events if they're designed for that. Here again is another side view, the observation well. We talked about that before. Just a few examples of different installations before. It's a pretty large project. There is maintenance, like we talked about with all of these, with the conventional solutions as well as our green solutions, things you need to do to keep these functioning. Rain barrels and cisterns. Rain barrels are smaller sizes, typically about 50, 55 gallons. You can see a lot of these pre-made solutions that you can buy at home improvement stores or other things. There's also the Northern Virginia Rain Barrel Partnership. I'm not sure how they're doing on what they're doing nowadays with distribution or you know, those build events that they typically have, but I'm sure they have more information on their website. So cisterns are really large scale solutions. They can take a whole lot more water than these smaller rain barrels. What can you do with the water? Generally using them outside your home. So if you're a veggie gardener or have other garden areas, garden plots, that you can reuse that water to water around your landscape if you're establishing things, or again, vegetables during our hot, droughty summers, bird baths, you know, other general reuse. A little bit about installation that I'm not going to talk about. These can be really landscaped beautifully and either stick out or sort of blend into the landscape as you, however you prefer. We sort of talked about some of those. So limitations, really the barrels have a limited capacity. So we saw some pictures where people put multiple barrels side by side to sort of daisy chain them, or just get a larger cistern because they can fill up really quickly in a rainstorm. All right. This is our general email for Conservation District at fairfaxcounty.org. When we do send out some resource links at the end of this, I will have my direct email address in there so you can have my contact information. So at this point in time, I've got some slides that have the individual questions that people submitted. Before we get into that, were there any things that came in through the chat? Oops, let me see if I can get to it.
Yes, there were 3 questions related to the plants.
Related to
One of them you answered, I think, which is if you're digging out turf to replace with natives, how far down should you dig to amend the soil? And it looked like that would be 2 to 3 inches, I guess.
For some of these areas, really going deeper, if you can get to 6 or 8 inches. I've seen some statistics, when we build our homes with typical construction, we use really heavy equipment and machinery. So the compaction of the soil is really, really drastic. So I've heard compaction, after construction can be actually even many feet deep. So really the deeper that you can get to break up that compaction is best. If you can get down to a foot, it's really hard to find an equipment or a machinery that can, those rototillers can kind of break up the top couple inches. I don't know if they quite make it to 6 inches, but if you can relieve 6, 8, or 12 inches of that top layer of compaction, it's really gonna be better for free draining. I'm trying to get the chat up. I think I need to pause. Do I need to pause my share to? Oh, here it is.
I've been putting them in that document I sent you, if
Okay.
that's helpful.
Let me pause the share. Let me go. Where did I have that? Okay. Native plants that aren't evergreens and they're dying back in the winter, do you still have erosion control in the winter? So if there's still sort of, depends on the native plants, I'll say. For the most part, you're still going to have that dried above ground biomass that you're not removing. Hopefully you're leaving that area up over the winter as areas for wildlife to overwintering insects and all that stuff, and then waiting until late winter, so sort of end of February, early March, to be pruning back some of that. So that above ground biomass, the dead material, will help. If it's areas that have mulch cover as well, if it's a more formal sort of mulched bed with native plants, that mulch is that hardwood mulch really is going to also be a cover or soil barrier cover to prevent erosion, hold the soil in place. So shady areas in our clay soils, I'm guessing under tree roots, so there's tough competition. Sort of depends if they're more wet areas or more dry areas. I think on the, Margaret, you can correct me if I'm wrong, on the Plant Nova Natives website, you've got some different guides of plants for kind of tricky spots. I think there's one for sort of shady ground covers, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, indeed. We have, there's a couple different pages that address this issue.
Okay, so hopefully that's going to be an adequate resource for that one. How can a deeper soil below a trench be more drainable? How can the deeper soil? So again, the top layers are kind of typically in our area, those heavier clay soils on top. And then again, we talked about the soil compaction that can happen to a couple feet deep. That happens when we build our homes and with that home construction. So typically once we get below that, we're gonna have freer draining soils. It just has to do with the soil horizons that are out there. We have wonderful soil scientists on staff. So if there's other soil questions, I can definitely direct them to him. So was that the extent of it for now, Margaret?
There's one more. How can the deeper soil below a trench be more drainable?
Oh, okay. I think I just tried to discuss that a little bit. Yeah, the upper layers are subject to that compaction that we get, and there's different soil horizons. So this one, if I'm not doing a good job with it, if the person still wants an email, I can connect them with our soil scientists to kind of discuss the native properties of our soils to go into that a little bit more deeper. But it's my understanding the top layers are really subject to the compaction in our urban soils that we have. With all of the heavy use in the machinery. So once we dig through those layers of compaction, it's freer draining. That's kind of where we site our septic solutions, you know, about 3 or 4 feet down, and with that infiltration trench and in these other systems, trying to get, you know, 2 to 3 feet down into those areas. Not sure where am I trying to pull up the chat. Oh, there it is. Yeah, so neighborhoods not familiar with rain gardens, HOAs deny everything and want turf. Is there a good way to educate them and bring them forward into the understanding? So we have resources out there. We've got this webinar that we encourage. We actually, our offices also offer to HOAs within Fairfax County again, if the HOA is interested in having us do a presentation. I know Plant Nova Natives will go out and do presentations about native plants. We can do solutions, you know, presentations about other drainage solutions. You know, this presentation. We also have ones about native plants and rain gardens and other things. And there's many, many guides out there. And again, these online webinars and resources that we can give to people if they want to sort of self-educate. Lower area was bedrock. It depends on, again, the soils are so wide and variable throughout the county. It depends. You can really get very deep before you hit bedrock. You might have some areas of the county out in Chantilly and some areas of Reston, you actually have really shallow soils that are very closer distance to bedrock. Most of us have a bit deeper. The bedrock can be very, very deep. Seen excavations go on in Tyson's, you know, where they're taking out, doing drastic regrading there, going down 20 feet, and, you know, not hitting bedrock at all. So really varied landscapes out there. So one of the guides that we have, I can put in the resources, talk about the where you can find out what soils you have. There are general soil maps, and they do talk about the depth to bedrock, and sort of a general estimate. But again, that can be used. Extension office could provide a speaker. Yeah, so again, other resources for speakers. Our local extension office, they've got the, again, we talked about Plant Nova Natives has speakers. Our office will go out and do talks. The Fairfax County Master Gardeners through our local extension office, they've got a speaker series. I know we've got the Fairfax Food Council that's been, you know, doing some speaker series and recording some webinars and having those resources out there. So those are lots of different resources. So I think we can transition out of the chat questions. Did you see any that I missed, Margaret?
No.
Okay. So if there aren't any more general questions, I can dig into the detailed questions that some of the HOAs answered. So if anybody wants to sign off now. We've run just over our hour. Thanks so much for tuning in. If you did send in some pictures with the detailed questions from your HOA, we will try and go through some of those now.
Of course, everyone else is welcome to stay on if they like.
Sure. Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So let me. So we're getting a little bit of somebody's. Did we mute everybody?
Yeah, if you're not on mute, put yourself on mute. I'm trying to find where it's making the noise. I don't know who it is.
Okay, maybe I'll just
Better,
keep.
thank you. Whoever who it is.
Oh.
Oh,
I think someone's got some yard work going on in the background, but if that's you, if you can try and mute your phone, or again, go in and mute your microphone. Okay, so this drainage question was from a townhome community in Alexandria. They had two questions. One was about material to replace a retaining wall. That was previously pressure-treated lumber. They've gotten varying bids. As will happen with, this drainage work and construction work, there can be many different solutions. Like we talked about conventional solutions and then kind of these green or low impact design solutions. There can be many different ways. Even if you ask my coworkers different ways to solve solutions in a landscape, there can be many different solutions. So that's pretty common. So for the first one, that retaining wall for this townhome community in Alexandria, I pulled up the, this one, it looks like there's, that is a Fairfax County maintained outfall, and there is a stormwater easement that incorporates that area. I didn't know if that the person has checked or if they want to chime in. My first step, I would go to the Fairfax County's Maintenance and Stormwater Management Division, put in a request. To me, it looks like, it's near being in an easement. I don't know if it isn't an easement, if it's something that they would comment on for a structure being in their easement, or if they would, what kind of guidance they would provide. But that would sort of be my first step there. Moving on from that, our offices, we are non-regulatory, but we try to advise everybody, looking at there's regulations and permits on all sorts of things, and retaining walls, once they get above a certain height, if they're shorter, I think 2 feet or under maybe, I can send this resource around. They don't need a permit if they're taller than that. I think maybe above 2 or above 3 feet, I can't remember. There are permits involved with those retaining walls. There's another resource called the Engineer of the Day. They used to have a walk-in office in the Fairfax County, the first floor of the Harwood building. For now, that resource is just a phone line only to call the Engineer of the Day, but you can speak with them with questions about permits or other things that you want to do, and they'll give some advice and guidance. So that's a great place to go to about that retaining wall. Typically, I'll say in that system, I think I included this. This was a picture of that retaining wall. So this is a lakefront. It's sort of a stream system. So in these areas, walls typically do fail. They get kind of undermined in these dynamic systems. Using appropriate river rock or other solutions is more environmentally friendly. And in the long run, we do see these walls start to fail. And so there's a resource out there I can also include in the Reston Association, where there's many different lakes under management. They have a great document that talks about managing shoreline, trying to move away from bulkheads and into these other solutions using living shorelines, softer solutions depends on, you know, the amount of energy you're getting though. This is a very high energy, with a very large outfall, lots of flow coming out of here, which is why I said first try to look at the easement and see what maintenance and stormwater management says, and then go from there. The other question, rotting bulkheads, some have just, you know, replaced it with sort of similar, just maintenance, you know, remove and replace, and others have built riprap or rock material. For the continuity of the shoreline, from what I could see in this community, the whole thing was bulkheaded. So to me, this looked like, you know, an isolated area. Maybe the homeowner association just wanted to remove and replace with the same material, doing a bulkhead again. Again, we talked about today, we're moving away from bulkheads and going into these living shoreline solutions that do sometimes incorporate some riprap if there is an area that gets more wave energy or wave action. I wasn't sure about this lake, if there's boats or other motorized things. That looked pretty small, so I'm assuming that there's no motorized activity allowed on it. But you know, a large scale kind of environmental restoration would really be removing all of the bulkheads and kind of converting that area to be more friendly for wildlife and creating a great edge habitat. For this one, I was really thinking more remove and replace. I don't know if that community wants to unmute themselves or add in the chat if they had any clarifying questions. Let me see if I can.
Carol says, thanks. We will ask about easement for the wall. No motorized boats on our lake.
Okay. All right. Again, if there's any follow-up, we'll put my email in there for follow-up questions. This was a condo association with some steps that we've got pictures of, different proposals for large boulders and or topsoil and sort of pre-treated timber. So here were two pictures of this area. This is pretty common that we see in townhomes, condo association, those things, where, you know, it looks like the sidewalk to me is pitched this area. So all of this water is coming this way. We've got really heavy shade canopy from these trees once they leaf out. So the turf grass isn't really hanging in there. It looks like it's pretty beat up. It's really pretty shady. So that solution is just not holding the soil in place. For here, I think a little bit of rock material, really not even that great. Sometimes what's hard to tell when you're looking at drainage is whether this is, I don't know if there's a bus stop or kids, you know, wait for a bus or something. Sometimes they like to shortcut the stairs and just kind of run up the side and play around. So sometimes it's hard with drainage solutions to really see, did this get, you know, eroded because of foot traffic and then water has just started to follow that channel? Or is it really just a drainage channel and then there's no footpath that's also compacting that area and denuding the landscape? So sometimes those are a little tricky to tease out. We tell folks to understand these drainage solutions. This is a gorgeous sunny day, but to get their boots on and go out in the rain with, you know, rain jacket and umbrella, take some observations around the community, understand what's going on during those flows and those rainstorms. We like homeowners to try and observe, I would say, a typical rainstorm. So the really, really heavy pouring rainstorms don't give us a great picture of what's normally going on, because in those instances, pretty much everything is getting overwhelmed. We like to see sort of that typical rainstorm that we're going to get. Over 90% of our rainstorms in Virginia are 1 inch of rainfall or less events. So it's not those big pouring rain ones. Those do give us lots of damage, but trying to observe during a typical rainfall here. You know, I'm sure there's different costs associated with the retaining wall versus the rock solution. Guessing the rock solution could be the cheaper option, and I think it would be completely appropriate here. I don't really see the need for a retaining wall unless aesthetically there was some other reason why you wanted to do a series of retaining walls and maybe have flat planter bed areas or something. But for this one, I thought the just armoring with a little bit of rock.
Maria, what if they use the rocks, but also maybe put a shrub in there or something to keep the kids from charging up the hill?
Yeah, if it is a footpath, maybe sort of up here or down here, kind of blocking off that as footpath access, and then, you know, letting that area recover. Maybe other vegetation will start to grow in there, or maybe you can include other native plants and you don't need to upgrade to the rock solution. But like you're saying, blocking or kind of screening the area off and seeing how it recovers. With stormwater, we like to take things in steps. So we can start with small pieces and then see how they work and see what impact if they're holding up, and then you can kind of scale up from there. So pretty dynamic process when you're dealing with stormwater management solutions. You know, start in one place and then working your way up if you're still progressively seeing erosion or impact in those areas. So maybe starting with shrubs or just sort of other ways to block off, and then see, you know, if this area is recovering at all. If, you know, some mulch will stay in place. If there's a lot of storm water running through here, the mulch will be washed away, and you'll see that happen. From this picture, looks like a little bit of rill coming through here, digging down into the soil. So I do think there is some drainage happening, not just footpath, but yeah, good solution. So if there aren't any questions on that one, this one, I don't know if the homeowner wants to unmute or add into the chat box. I guess the question was with this hole, if it was worried that it was a sinkhole. I think that's what the email was referring to. To me, this looks like a very purposefully dug hole, like somebody was really trying to discover what's going on with some drainage solutions. So to me, it didn't look like a sinkhole had opened up. It looked more of like somebody was trying to understand drainage and see what's going on there. I'm not sure if that person has any more background about it. In dealing with sinkholes, I use that kind of in quotations because in this area, we don't really have any of the soil types where we have these drastic sinkholes that open up. So our soil scientist, I think we have this information. We have a solving drainage and erosion problems technical guide on our website, and one of them, they have a reference to sinkholes. So he recommends just getting really tough fill soil, sort of that typical clay that we have, and compacting it in lifts of a couple inches of soil and just compacting it down really well to fill in those areas, and then just revegetating over the top of them to solve that. So I think hopefully that resource.
Maria, Avi chimed in that they were unable to unmute, but I have just unmuted them. But wrote in the chat box, supposedly the hole was formed by a contractor using heavy equipment for power washing and created the hole. But my landscaper told me the hole was formed because the pipe broke underneath it.
Yeah, can you hear me now? This is actually Kathleen. I'm the one that submitted the pictures.
Yes, Kathleen, we hear you.
Oh, hi, yay.
Yeah.
Hi. I was told every time I ask about this, I get a different response. But initially I was told it was because we had some power washing done and the contractor was using heavy equipment and that created the hole. But then the landscaper on Friday told me that those pipes aren't working properly. They're like getting rocks and sand formed under them, and that's what created the hole.
So there
And he
can,
wants to dig around and replace the pipes and then fill in everything again.
okay, so a couple different things there. The drainage pipes, so it was sounding like the contractor was saying they're not performing properly. Like, are you, you know, there's not, are you noticing other areas that are impacted by poor drainage, basically?
No, and we haven't had any owners complain except to say, why is there a big hole in the front yard?
Okay.
So
To me,
everything seems to be draining, but I don't know.
Yeah, to me, I think you could go back in and cover that up. I think it looked like somebody was trying to investigate what was going on with the pipes there, you know, trying to see what was connected where, because a lot of times when these drainage pipes get buried, also I see the black corrugated pipe. So that could be perforated or non-perforated. So like we talked about with that French drain solution, the perforations over time, soil can settle in there, clog those up. Also, these corrugated pipes tend to get crushed over time. A longer lasting solution
That's
is
what he
sort of
said was happening.
okay, a longer lasting solution is using that hard PVC. You know, it might be more expensive at the upfront and harder for a contractor to work with because of, you know, if there's roots or utility line conflicts, it's not as flexible to get around. But over time, we do see these corrugated pipes that are buried get crushed and fail. So not just in the French drain solutions, but just when they're used as kind of solid pipe. But if you're not seeing any impacts, you know, backing up downspouts or, you know, low discharge wherever these pipes are outfalling, I would say for now, you can just go back in, cover that up, and keep an eye on things. What can happen with some like really large scale pipes, like the county maintained stormwater, well, it's even smaller pipes. What can happen is kind of cavities can open up around those lines and water can pipe kind of around the line instead of going through the lines, and that you can get kind of sunken areas sometimes that happens where those lines are built, because over time there's settlement and some of that piping can start to occur, but I don't think any of that is happening here.
Okay, because he's saying that back pipe is like full of sediment and he wants to dig like around the hole, like a foot on each side, and check and make sure the pipe, you know, see if it's broken or not, and like you said, replace it with PVC pipe. Do you think it's something we should check on?
It's, you know, if you're not seeing impacts anywhere, like I said, I don't know if investigating it is worth a look or not. It's already uncovered right now. So the other thing that we tell homeowners to do is, I don't have quite as much context as to where these pipes are connected or coming from, but you know, if you move into a new house or you don't know how things are going and draining and where these pipes are going, like that original picture we saw of that downspout connection. So it was just the drain pipe into black corrugated pipe and it's buried to somewhere. You move into a new home or new condo association, whatever, you might not know, there might not be history. Where is this thing going? So we tell homeowners if they can during dry weather to take a hose, and if they can work it into that, you know, at that bottom of that downspout, if they can work off that downspout disconnection during dry weather and run a hose through there to try and see if it's freely draining. It's going to take a while for that water to drain through there and then make it to the outfall or the exit, wherever, if you know where the exit is, or maybe you don't know where the exit is. And we also tell people they can do that test. So that might be a way for the HOA to test and see if one of those connections are backed up or have the the
Okay.
contractor do that. You know, there's other like more expensive solutions too, like that you might use for plumbing lines. Like you can do a, you know, closed circuit television of those lines that they can stick that in and really look up and see, you know,
Mhm.
if that's kind of more intensive. I don't think, it sounds like
Yeah.
you're having issues.
This hole is just a few doors down from the pictures next to the stairs. It's kind of the whole area just holds water and then it all runs off. Yeah, right at the end there.
Okay. So are there drainage pipes? I mean, downspouts
Yeah.
going somewhere, right? So buried
Yeah. I just want to know
connection.
where it drains out.
Yeah, again, trying to do that dry weather investigation. If you can take a hose and try to see, you know, where those are buried, have somebody scouting around. Where those solutions to understand aren't really helpful is if there is one of those buried infiltration trenches or dry well solutions. If you run a
Mhm.
pipe in there, you and excuse me, if you run a hose in there, you know, it could take a very long time for that system to fill up before you find where that discharge or that outfall is. Another common
Mhm.
solution that landscapers do, if the soils are free draining well enough, they'll take these downspouts and they actually just kind of dead end them in the soil. So what they'll do is sometimes sort of like a French drain, a modified French drain, but sort of with some
Mhm.
infiltration capacity. So a lot of times contractors just bury these downspouts, connect them to a corrugated black pipe, and then just sort of cap it on the
Mhm.
end. And if the soil is well draining enough, for the most part, it can take that, you know, the water from those storms without having to do sort of that larger dry well solution. So that's another typical solution we've seen within landscapes or with landscapers. So
Mhm.
I
I
would say
think
if
that is what's happening because there's no like outlets on the retaining wall there. I think it just dead ends, like you said, underneath.
okay. Um, if there aren't any problems, you know, being experienced, I don't know if a investigation is warranted, but it's always good to know how your drainage systems work. So
Yeah.
you could do a little bit more looking.
Oh, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. All right. So this was a condo association in Reston. I don't know if, hopefully if they're still on the line or not. This one I was having a little bit of hard time following and understanding, tracking, to kind of distill the problem. I guess there's some drains that are being discharged, lessen erosion by diverting some drains or lengthening. We've got a resource protection area as well because of the lake. So there were some pictures. I don't know if this person is still on, if they can
I'm
unmute themselves or, okay. So I've got a couple of the pictures here. Did you want to try and describe a little bit?
okay. There's really two areas we're looking at. One is located higher up on the property, and that's first one set of buildings. And I think you've already answered our questions about for what we have, we really don't need to change the drainage system. We just have an area that kind of flattens out. It really doesn't pool for a rain garden, but it's very sparse. So we need a lot of native plants and shrubs in there. And then after that, it slopes down to a parking lot, and grass really isn't growing well there. So there are underground drains that come out to the parking lot and then, goes into the Fairfax County drains. And then, so I wasn't sure, I think we're going to have trouble with the homeowners association putting a lot of money into that area where the grass kind of grows there, but anyway, then going across the parking lot, we have a set of buildings. And on one side, the end of the buildings, it's a rather steep hill that goes down to the lake. The lower part of it is the RPA, where we have to work with Ruston Association for putting any plantings in there. But it's really just there. And I think our major question was, do we just need to start planting up toward our end of the property, on our end of the property, which is like half the hill. There's one drain that comes out there.
Mm-hmm.
It isn't really making a little gully. It's just that there's been a lot of runoff just from rain that has just denuded this area.
Yeah, so even, somebody had a good point about vegetation in the winter. Half of the year when the leaves are off our trees, what can we do to protect the soil? If it's too shady for turf to grow really well, or moss or kind of other ground covers. If you do have a lawn that might have a lot of clover in it or other things, even if it's, got wild violets and all those things all really fade out in the wintertime. So that's not doing much to hold the soil. Keeping, mulch is a ground cover. So that's the impact of that rainfall from the precipitation, just that we need to break up that rainfall impact because that when it hits bare soil, that's what dislodges our soil particles and carries it down downstream. And that's how we, get that soil erosion. So keeping it covered with mulch. Again, if you've got a heavy flow through that area, it might be carrying the mulch away, or is there a footpath that people have worn through there? Looking at how that area is used, a little more investigation into that. If you can leave the leaf litter, sometimes when it's really sloped like this though, the leaves are just gonna blow everywhere. If there isn't a lot of understory, like it doesn't look like there is understory, like ground covers or other things that would kind of hold those leaves in place, a lot of times they just kind of blow off the landscape into the parking lot, and that creates maintenance headaches. Let's see here. So a resource, after yesterday's stay in place order, I don't know if anything's changed, but before that, I had spoken with Fairfax Relief. So that's an environmental nonprofit that serves Fairfax County residents, and they give out free bare root trees and shrubs. Prior to yesterday, she was still trying to do so in the springtime and the fall time, they will distribute free bare root trees and shrubs to homeowners, HOAs, other folks. I think on Plant Nova Native's website, they've got a link and information about Fairfax Relief and what species they have for this year to distribute. So I really encourage that as a great source for folks to go and try and, get some understory plantings or other things for some of these areas.
Yeah, maybe if you have the budget for it, you might plant some sedges as well.
Yeah, if you
catch those leaves before they get down to the street and hold them in place.
Yeah, if you can incorporate some more of the herbaceous material, kind of the ground cover level. Sedges love shade, ferns love shade, other things of that nature. Again, there might be some, I believe we referenced the Plant Nova Natives list already for kind of heavy shade ground covers.
And certainly your cheapest option for covering the biggest area would be the shrubs and trees.
Yeah.
Some of these shrubs will spread so far, like, well, you need to plant a couple of them.
Yeah, I think Relief I saw has indigo bush on there. That's one that will spread by rhizomes and colonize and fill in areas. So that one you know, if they get established, can fill in, you know, if it's happy, if it's the right soil moisture and sunlight exposure. Those are all things you need to think about when siting plants. How dry or wet is the site, and you know, how much sun or shade does it really get? If you stick a plant, a lot of times people really try to take plants that need more sun and force them into areas that need more shade. And while they might grow there, they're really probably not going to thrive very well. They're not going to grow very large or very fast or anything. Maybe that's what you want in that space, but it's not optimal for the growth of that plant. It's not going to perform as well as it normally would.
That's all very helpful. Thank you. We did have a landscaper put like 25 ferns in that upper flat area last fall. None of them survived, and I think we're just working with a landscaper that doesn't plant correctly. They just come in, and also the soil wasn't amended. We did have a soil study done through Virginia Tech. We probably we should have that amended, but I think that your website has a list of landscapers that you recommend, that they're so-called organic landscapers, but they're going to prevent a lot of problems of incorrect planting and
Yeah,
planting
Plant
in the wrong-
Navigator's website, we have a whole list of those. And, but you know, most of the ferns haven't emerged yet. So if you're not seeing them yet, that may be just because it's too early in the spring. And I also just wanted to mention, if you're putting in shrubs and trees, if there are any deer here, you're going to need to protect them from the deer until they outgrow the deer.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
All great points. Yeah, there are some ferns, I know people are talking about, you know, wintertime again. There are some of them that are native to the area that are evergreen, so that might hold that ground cover a little bit more, be a presence all winter long, like Christmas fern.
I think those were Christmas ferns we put in.
Oh, then it's a shame they didn't make it. You know, even so, those plants that are evergreen in the wintertime, when things slow down, they still have water budget and needs. So our native plants, you know, we encourage the use of them because they're more well adapted to our climate and our soils and those things. But they're not bulletproof, like you said. If they're not installed correctly, or if they're installed and then they're not installed at the right time of year, they're not, you know, if deer really get to them, mow them down, or if they don't get water. For when you're installing plants, we really say it takes 3 growing seasons to see them thrive and get established. So that can be quite a while to keep an eye and monitoring, you know, making sure they've got proper amount of rainfall, or, you know, might have to supplementally water them or protect them from deer and other things. So while they're should be tougher in the long run, you know, they're not magic beans you can throw on the ground and walk away.
That's right. Thank you. Yes, we're only using the resources from Northern Virginia Native Plant Society and the State Society. We thought we did our homework pretty well on that, and we had attended a couple of conferences. So I think, well, we'll just keep working at it. Thank you.
Sure. This one was, this one had a bunch of pictures, and I didn't know if this person's still online, if they recognize there it was an HOA. I'll parse through the pictures. I believe they had some playground areas, and they also had some runoff areas. If anybody wants to join in the chat box or try and unmute themselves if they're still on the line, if some of these look familiar. This one looks like, I don't know if this is a formal stormwater channel, if this is an outfall here with some rock material. It makes me think that it is a stormwater drainage area. there, I think you
Hey
see.
Maria, this is Nick. Yeah, I'm with the HOA
Okay.
for this property. So this, if you kind of imagine a big square, this drain is on the right-hand front side, right by the sidewalk. I don't think it's so much an outflow than a intake.
Okay.
The creek comes down the hill towards that drain,
Mm-hmm.
and there's some erosion issues. Basically, from this photo that you're showing now, the water comes kind of right in the middle of the photo. You can see the end of the fence. The water comes down along the fence and then cuts across the entire playground, where that tree is at the corner of the playground, on the back side of the playground, to this creek. And then if it's
Okay.
heavy enough, it'll go past that fence and continue down that left-hand side of the park towards the neighbor, which you can, if you see the pine straw on the left-hand edge, that is a photo from their patio, that rain.
Okay. So let me go through a couple of these. So sounds like problems with overland drainage, drainage paths,
Yes.
definitely
Yeah, so
some
that's
bare
the
soil.
edge of the playground where it comes down. Lots of bare soil. It's undercutting the 4x4s,
Mm-hmm.
and some of them are rotting and they're unstable. So at some point, we're going to need to get those replaced. Ultimately, long story short, we got some money to improve our playground area, but upon starting to plan for extra equipment and other, things that people can actually use, we discovered that the grading and previous landscaping wasn't executed correctly.
Mm-hmm.
And so we're trying to address those issues now, as opposed to putting more money into extra or additional equipment and still having the additional water issues.
Yeah, so a lot of times playgrounds or other raised beds, even in your home landscape, when you put something with a hard edge, maybe it was this great low-lying flat area that you thought would be perfect, or you graded out to put something, and inadvertently you might be cutting off a flow path. And that flow gets diverted, like you said, it starts to maybe undercut or undermine structure that you have. So you might not even know that that flow path was there before, and now it's getting diverted. So understanding where that overland flow path is, how much flow is going to that area. Other things that can happen along this edge. So a little bit of that investigation that I talked about in a typical size rainstorm, going out to try and understand the volume and the flow and how things are moving through the landscape can help distinguish this issue with the runoff versus, a lot of these areas, playground areas in particular, just sort of get loved to death with the turf on the edge. Really heavy shade presence I can see here probably. So the turf is not really holding up. Extending the mulch in the playground area, if there is heavy flow coming through here, that's not a great idea because you're going to cut it off and it's going to be ponding, and need to think about how you're going to deal with that drainage before, like you said, you've got some money to do some further enhancements. Understanding the flow path of this one, let me see if whoops, what did I do? Sorry.
You unshared.
Whoopsies. I was just trying to look at one of the notes I had. With this one, and pull up, let me see if I can pull up another tool that I have on the web. Let's see how quickly it'll load for me to try and look at this area. Is the DeQuincy Drive address a good one to look at for reference?
Yeah, that's the address of the playground.
Okay. Let's see. Let me try and share again. Share. All right. Is this map loaded for everybody or
Yes,
in the
we're seeing
process
it.
of loading? Okay. So I'm not sure how this is, it's pretty slow. So I'm not sure if I'm going to get all the detail on the phone call. I can always follow up with an email and another phone call with you about this if it's not going to load fast enough. But it looks like we've got the playground area here, the drainage you were talking about, then it drains into here. So these blue lines, they are used to designate overland flow. So these are drainage contours that were developed that show overland relief. They look at the contours of the land where things are sloped, water, drains downhill. So some of these are formal stormwater channels that might be taking a whole bunch of water, and other ones of these might just be secondary flow paths that to the naked eye, if you're not out there when it rains, you might not even know that this water flow path is there. A lot of times you won't see signs, there's no erosion going on. Everything is just conveying, like for this one, over that turf with no problem, and there's no erosion occurring. But again, when we get into, is it this flow path that you were talking about? We've got the playground here. Or is it hard to tell?
So that solid blue vertical line is probably the creek itself, which I think is a Fairfax County stormwater owned
Yes. So this
piece.
this red part here and this blue, this is showing, I'm not sure why it's disjointed, but there is, like I referred to with that other one, a stormwater easement there. So if there's problems within that channel, I would contact the maintenance and stormwater management about that channel or those structures.
I think it's that back one that your mouse is over now that we're kind of having the issues with. If it's really heavy, it doesn't follow that curve. It just comes straight down along the left-hand side towards the back of that house that's in the left-hand corner. And then where it kind of comes across the screen and turns south, there's a big wood pile there that was an old tree that was cut down. And what we've discovered is that instead of going straight back to that stormwater management creek, it's kind of undercut that wood pile. And so it's super unstable. It's kind of like a game of Jenga or pick up sticks, where if you put your foot wrong, the whole thing is going to collapse. So it's a whole nother issue that we have to deal with, but that's kind of where the water is going. And our original intention was to kind of hopefully develop some of that area into kind of a natural playground and expand the use of this area. But until we figure out the water issue and where the water is going, and we're able to either mitigate it or manage it.
Yes, so I would encourage, like we talked about,
Developing areas.
Sorry, Nick, your connection apparently isn't very good, so some of what's coming out is garbled.
Yeah, sorry if we're losing a little bit. So a little of that homework that we talked about, understanding the flow path, watching it during a storm for kind of quantity, understanding if there's, I'm not sure if I have the RPA. I do have RPA on. Okay, so there's no resource protection area in here. Again, before you undertake any, for any of these HOAs with any of these practices, talking to that engineer of the day for Fairfax County, they're a great resource to see if whatever permits or things might be needed or necessary. Anytime that you're disturbing over 2,500 square feet of land surface, there is a land disturbance permit that is required. So for an instance, for a home, you're doing something in the backyard or other landscaping projects, whenever that 2,500 square feet is calculated, whenever you leave a hard paved surface edge. So if you've got a stockpile of materials, on this hard asphalt surface that you're using, this area is not included, but if you've got an access path, you know, from the hard surface that you're taking machinery all the way out here, that is how that 2,500 square feet of disturbance is calculated. So something to keep an eye on for some of these projects that might be a little bit more remote. One thing that is recommended for contractors to do to try and keep under that 2,500 square feet of disturbance is phasing projects. Like, say, if there was going to be a little bit of grading done here, really just to reestablish a channel or a swale to try and get this connection more formal so you can have more usable space to do a natural playground or whatever you want. Make sure it's not, you know, undercutting, making something serious under that wood pile, wherever that is. Phasing the project, so having a contractor not disturb any land surface more than 2,500 square feet at one point in time. So for these projects, always starting upstream or uphill is a great idea, and then working your way downhill or downstream. So doing any land disturbing activities, stabilizing that area, mulch, seed, or straw, or whatever, completing one part, and then kind of moving to building the next bit of channel. This one, I'm not sure if I'm providing quite as much context. We can always talk and try and have a separate phone call if I'm, or follow up with if you get some additional pictures or things.
Oh yeah, I have lots more pictures. I just didn't want to inundate you. I think a separate phone call would totally be worthwhile. Is this something where we could reach out to the CAP program and get their insight?
So it could be potentially, if this is well, I'm sure it is, an HOA parcel like you talked about, it could be applicable depending on what the prescribed solution might be for a conservation assistance program, which is cost share available to HOAs, places of worship, community associations generally within Fairfax County. So we can follow up a little bit more, and I can include that coordinator, and we can try and talk a little bit more about that program for this one.
Sounds good, thanks.
Okay. Let me move back to see if I got that right. So this one, I think this was, if this HOA folks are still on the line, this HOA was a small one, 24 homes. It looks like lots of grass-lined swales conveying drainage along the roadside. When I was viewing these, for the most part, sometimes it's hard with the leaves down. I didn't see too many signs of active erosion in the pictures. So in some areas of the county, we have like curb and gutter systems. So along our roadways, we have those curbs and those curb inlets that are those drains that are capturing the runoff from our hard surfaces, our roads, and then piping them to a creek or a stream's edge. In other areas that are less just dependent on the time of development or less other solutions, that there are these roadside swales. So instead of curb and gutter that was installed, it's just these roadside swales that are meant to capture and convey that water instead of piping it. Another way of moving the water along, like we talked about. Whoops. So for these, I think the only spot where I really saw some bare soil and erosion was up here. I don't know if that HOA owner, association owner is still on the line and wants to add any context, or I can email them.
This is, I'm the owner of that property and in the HOA. That picture probably is the best one, the one where frankly you see me, my shadow as I took the picture with my cell phone. The one before this, that one there, as you pointed out, that's where the most serious problem is, but it is getting worse in several areas over the years. And I've lived here for 20 years. And each property is 5 acres. And the common areas, the roads, we own. So we're responsible for repairing those and have done several times. And I don't see a connection between the erosion and the quality of the road at any particular time. But in terms of the optics of it, it's just not as pretty as you drive into the neighborhood as it should be, and hopefully as it could be, if we could get something to grow there and stop washing away the soil. I'll stop there.
Okay. So some more kind of green or landscape solutions for these roadside swales. One thing, let me see if I can do this. I might stop sharing my screen again. Sorry if it goes off when I try to go in between. Let me try to navigate back towards here and look at some of the amount of flow. Let's see if it'll load. So understanding those grass swales and how they look from, they are a stormwater management feature. So conveying runoff, one thing to understand is just how much runoff is conveyed through them. So turf, when it's well-maintained turf, can take a lot of runoff and it can really prevent that soil erosion. So it might be the appropriate type of ground cover for those areas. So we can talk about other solutions. This was one. Are we on the map screen now?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess for context, yeah, very large parcels draining to RPA stream system. It doesn't ever look like there's too much congregating, draining from the roadsides. So converting those, like I said, the concern would be taking them out of turf if the amount or the quantity of runoff is too great. That the turf might really be the best option. So you can give it a try with some other types of, ground covers to stand up to the flows. If turf isn't aesthetically pleasing, I'm not sure if, I'm sure the community probably won't like rock line channels, sometimes using rock line channels like dry creek beds, surrounded by an edging of conservation landscaping is how some people sort of screen those stormwater solutions. So maybe more, we're stabilizing the soil on the bottom with that rock line, and then maybe including like taller bunch grasses around the upper sloped edge just to kind of screen that rock material. Maybe aesthetically, if there's I'm thinking that as it's hard for me to understand, and maybe you can follow up with some pictures of examples of other things other solutions you've seen that you might think the community likes to enhance. From an aesthetic point of view, it might be, establishing key areas. I don't know if when you drive into the neighborhood, if there's kind of an HOA sign or sort of an entryway that more money could be spent to sort of do a more formal landscaping, using some Virginia native plants kind of right out front versus a whole scale look at these swales, because there's a lot of them. I can tell, even though it's a small community, it's a lot of real estate moving through there.
Maria, I will send you more pictures so you get a better context. We do have an opening with signs. We have some islands with native plants on them. My wife is a master gardener, and her and several of the other ladies have put in plants on several of the islands. I can show you that, and we also use rocks at the entranceway on both sides of the roads, where the opposite of the road that we just showed you, where it's actually culverts that were having drainage problems, and we installed a lot of rocks in those. And I think that's been about a decade now, and that's solved that problem, I think. But it's these that are high and rise off of the road as opposed to the culverts that we're now having to address. I'll send you-
Privately owned roads, by the way, or is this VDOT?
That's what he said, private.
Roads.
That certainly gives you more scope.
Yeah.
What about just putting shrubs on that hill?
Let's see. Let me see if I can go back to.
I would put shrubs there if I could be somewhat assured that they would not be taken away by the next rainstorm. You know, it's the clay, it's very hard ground. It's not digging kind of ground. Right there.
Yeah.
So this one, and I'm sure it sounds like you've got great resources of master gardeners who know their stuff about plants. So looking at exposure and the amount of sunlight is going to be kind of key. How much sunlight, because we've got an overhang here, but I don't know if we have, you know, a good amount of morning or evening, late day sun, how hot and shady some of this area, you know, hot or shady, whatever, you know, this area could be. It looks pretty high and dry, pretty droughty. From a landscape solution, Margaret's talking about, you know, using some shrubs along that fence line. Those can be great solutions for kind of lower growing. Shrubs generally are lower maintenance. So those manicured beds that you talked about with some, you know, herbaceous, like lower growing stuff can be, you know, you got to keep up with those with some mulch and other things until they really, if you get a full grown in canopy cover, then some of the maintenance needs decline. But shrubs typically are lower maintenance if you can establish shrubs in an area. Shrubs with, you know, maybe some mulch cover underneath it. And the soil does look really tough here, like you said. I think you're definitely getting some erosion. You can see the splash up from when the rainfall is hitting, and I think ricocheting off this fence here. So trying to cover it. I don't think you need to do anything formal from a terracing standpoint. Sometimes on these bare eroded slopes, I think somebody else had a question too about, you know, removing ivy from slopes and how do you do it, you know, starting up at the top, like I talked about, and working your way down if you're removing ivy or something and trying to stabilize the top surface before you just remove it all in one fell swoop. There are different types of jute fiber, which are biodegradable, non-plastic fiber mats that you can kind of roll out to try and help if you're, you know, amending the soils and you're, or adding some different compost amendments in here to relieve a little bit of that compaction to give those shrubs a little bit better chance. Putting down some of that jute fiber mat can help hold the soil in place on this slope until things get established, and you can put some mulch over it and it can try to help sort of knit it all together.
Thank
What
you.
about putting like a dead log or something across that to sort of
Yeah, one of the
informally terrace it?
solutions. One of the solutions we did see, it looks like it's bowed concave or convex. I can't quite tell here. So using the down logs, like you saw in one of the other conservation landscaping projects that was done, to informally terrace, it could work. I don't know how much flow is really coming through here if we just kind of have a hot, dry, eroded slope. You know, the mowers and the that come through here too can really beat things up as well when they race across and compact our soils. So
That's a good point. We have a commercial contractor who does this area for all the roads. But obviously in areas like this, he's quit mowing because it's not needed. He used to mow it a decade ago, and the grass has just gone away.
Yeah, I think this one, maybe because of that shade conflict that we're getting here, but we try and get a good
week ago, so the shade's not obvious right now.
Yeah, if you can get a good handle on hours of sunlight and then go looking at the shrubs and possibly doing some of the informal terracing, you'll have to try and, I'm not sure how steep it is. You really have to try and anchor maybe those logs in place kind of on the back side with a little bit to hold them there to keep the mulch there. But I think some alternative ground covers, even some of the sedges, like Margaret said, can more lower growing bunch grass, kind of just depends on the community's aesthetic vision as well. But we can follow up with that one as well. So I'm going to, I didn't get these into the slide, but let me see if I can pull them up with, there was these last pictures from, if the person is still on, they're a condo community in Fairfax, various erosion control projects in a piecemeal manner, dry stream bed. Level of the hill is 4 inches below the bottom of the fence in the back where there is no ivy. Let me pull up. I think I've got, oh, okay. One picture at a time. Is Jana still on the line with this? Oops. Community. Okay, maybe. I know we've gone a little bit long, so maybe I can follow up with Jana just with email. She had a couple pictures of some of these. Let me share this screen. A few pictures of, dry creek bed again here, trying to solve some erosion issues. A lot of times these stairways also get, like we saw earlier, erosion running along the side of them, or bare slope hillside, so they've kind of extended up the hillside as well to try and combat some of this erosion that might have been coming down here. So I think, oh wait, did I not share that? Sorry.
We skip.
Okay. So I don't think Jana was still on the line, but she sent a couple of pictures of other things. Was there anybody that was still on, or any questions that came in the chat box to it?
One question was, how do you get those lovely maps up from the county?
Okay. So one of the, let me just stop that. One of the resource links that I can follow up with, there's a new mapping tool called JADE for Fairfax County, and it doesn't have the flow path lines that I was talking about with that one homeowner to understand the overland flow relief, but it's got many different layers out there. So you can see much of everything that we saw on that map with aerial imagery. They even have historical aerial imagery. I think it's a pretty cool tool to use. I think, Margaret, do we have that already on Plant Nova Natives as a web resource?
No, I don't remember if I put it up or not, but I certainly should and will.
Okay. I'll make a note in the resource email to include that.
Yeah, that was really fun. And somebody had asked, The sequence of planning to tackle a steep bank covered with English ivy. What's first? You rip it all out and then watch the topsoil run away? What's the plan? That seems to be quite common, actually.
Yeah, so like I talked about with that slope or with other problems, keeping that ivy kind of towards the base to hold the soil in place, starting at the top of the slope, removing the ivy. We talked about that jute fiber netting that's biodegradable. So using that to hold the soil in place as the plants that you put in get established. So trying, if you've amended with soil and other things, that jute fiber netting will work as mulch if you can include some hardwood mulch over it as well. If it's going to be raw, like on construction sites, for erosion control, they will use a whole bunch of straw everywhere just as the soil mulch cover. So depending where you are in your project, keeping a good straw cover over the top for the bare soil as it's being phased.
Well, Maria, as always, you are a font of knowledge and wisdom. Thank you so much. I learn so much every time I talk to you. Did anyone else have any questions?
I do have a question.
Go ahead, Molly.
Yes, thank you. Our landscaper, we have a contract with them, and they were ready to come in and dump mulch everywhere. And they were going to do some fertilizing too, which didn't make any sense to me. But so I suggested we just hold back on all that mulch, because I thought I had heard it recommended to not mulch or to mulch only with leaf mulch in the fall. Is that correct?
There can be some different schools of thought out there on mulch. I've heard people trying to prescribe shying away from excessive amounts of use of hardwood mulch, because it can actually have impacts as it's being broken down and being decomposed, that it's going to tie up some of the nutrients in the soil. For the most part, keeping a good cover on the soil, whatever type of mulch it is, just so we don't have bare soil. So some of our commercial landscapes, if you dig down, you've got a ton of mulch that's already been put down and established, because the landscapers come out and do that pretty regularly and really have a thick layer that you can get some volcano mulch problems on your trees and other things like that. Using leaf mulch has a little bit more of soil amendment properties. So that's can be another solution if you're trying to sort of enhance the capability. The leaf mulch has less nutrients and other soil amendment properties than going in with compost. The leaf mulch will definitely break down way sooner than that hardwood mulch. Really quickly degrade. So if you're really looking, if you've got large scale areas for these landscapes, I mean, we still definitely prescribe the use, as you heard me talk about it a lot, of using hardwood mulch. The county, well, I'm not sure right now, but the county, at some sites, I know the parks are closed, but they would have free sites where people can come take mulch and mulch options. I think in Arlington, they actually offer free mulch delivery. So there's other sources out there that you can get it, because you can, those costs can add up. But we still...
I'll just add that I think there's different situations where it's used. One is like you just planted and you need to not have the clay splash up and ruin your plants before before they drop enough of their own leaf material to form a natural mulch. you know, in the woods, you wouldn't be mulching because there's all that natural mulch, but there's a transition period before you get there. And the other thing is that I just learned recently that one of the main reasons why contractors make these gigantic mulch beds in HOAs and commercial areas is because they can then send an untrained employee out with a backpack full of herbicide and spray herbicide everywhere. So what you're really looking at in most cases is just a field of devastation. And that, I think, is something we want to try and change.
Yeah, those are, that's great insight. I hadn't heard about that. I think I've seen that practice sometimes going out.
Well, it explains a lot because, you know, when I put down mulch, the weeds still grow. When they put down mulch, the weeds don't grow. And that's why, because they're using herbicide everywhere.
They can use herbicide. The other things that they might be doing, and some homeowners do this as well, using a pre-emergent herbicide. So what they'll do is, in conjunction with the mulch, they might be applying, you might see it at your big box stores for a homeowner, called Preen is one product that's a pre-emergent herbicide. So it prevents the germination of those weeds. So not only are you putting down mulch as a barrier, but you're also putting down this chemical barrier. So that's really frequently used in those commercial landscapes, why you don't have weeds popping up. You know, using weed fabric and all those things definitely don't promote the use of it. They break down, they gum up, they come up, they don't last very long. Weeds will start coming through them. So weeds are always, you know, there's definitely landscape maintenance to be done with your beds, but trying to keep it manageable, establishing, you know, if you're taking some areas that turf, you maybe don't need to do your whole front yard in one shot. You can start with little islands, whatever can be manageable for you, and start small with a few plants, and over time they might grow large enough you can divide them, or if you've got things that will spread with rhizomes and fill in areas, or seed around, you know, different ways that plants spread. But yeah,
Yeah, that's
trying.
so right. And you want to do it kind of gradually in a homeowners association. Maybe start ringing some of those trees in the middle of empty mulch beds with some shrubs, and let the leaves just be underneath those, and then gradually expand them over time. So basically, over time, you've kind of reforested in a mini way.
Yeah, the trees, you know, we do want the understory layer. A lot of arborists say they don't like super heavy kind of under canopy planting from, you know, really close to the trees, messing with the drip line and other things. You've got all those root conflicts, and the trees are thirsty, and your ground cover could be thirsty. So still making sure you're giving the trees some space, that you're not kind of super inundating them. And it can be really hard with tree roots to be planting things. Sometimes that's why we say use those little bare root guys, install things that are smaller rather than larger shrubs. Some of the herbaceous stuff you can get in small size with plugs, so you don't need to do so much soil disturbance.
Any other questions, anyone?
If the person with the flow paths, I can reach out to them and follow up if there's an area, if they wanted that map in particular.
I think they're off the
Okay.
call now. All right, you guys, you've been so patient. Thank you all very much. And you'll be getting an email from us soon.
Great. Thanks so much,
Okay.
Margaret.
All righty. Bye-bye, everybody.
Take care.
Bye, thank you.
Welcome.